Today, the 3rd of May 2020, we commemorate the World Press Freedom Day. At a time it is difficult to even mention press freedom in some countries. But we fight on, we soldier on, and we fight for journalism without fear or favor. If we call out media owners who do not pay their journalists well, those who do not facilitate journalists as they go about with their work, those who do not respect the safety of journalists, especially when covering riots and pandemics like the COVID-19. If we call out governments that do not respect the freedoms and rights of journalists, we call out security agencies that batter journalists every day as they go out to work. If we practice journalism without fear or favor, then shall we make a better future for our brothers and sisters who are hoping to join the profession? So as we celebrate today, I want to applaud all our brothers and sisters who are at the forefront of covering the COVID-19 pandemic. We say keep safe and make sure that your life comes first before the job. From the Untold Story, I say a happy World Press Freedom Day, and keep safe, keep practicing journalism without fear or favor. Together, we can make journalism better.
We need to revive the discussion on regulation. In Uganda, we are used to statutory regulation with some kind of repressive regulation regime, especially for the broadcasting sector. So we need to revive that discussion with a view of whether we can actually move away from government or statutory control over the media in terms of regulation to exploring at best self-regulation or at least co-regulation. It's very important that the media is able to manage its affairs or to have a very big say on how the affairs of the media are managed. And that the best way to do that is to have a regime of regulation where there is considerable media practitioners' input, and that is either self-regulation or co-regulation.
Today we celebrate World Press Freedom Day amidst a pandemic that is not only affecting Ugandan journalists, but all global journalists. This is quite a challenging time. So as we celebrate World Press Freedom Day and we are working under the theme without fear or favor, can we look beyond that? It so happens it's happening at a time when about 2-3 days ago, Ugandan journalists have been discussing the poor facilitation. I am imagining how are journalists being facilitated as they go to the front line to cover these COVID-19 stories. If you want someone to give you a story without fear or favor, can you have them protected better? Give them quality and enough protective gears, because we bring the stories to you and we need to give you quality stories without fear or without favor. There are so many things that have been happening in Uganda in terms of violating the rights of journalists. So my call to everyone out there, especially to the police, to the media house owners, can we respect the rights of journalists? Can we give journalists a better pay? 5,000 for a story cannot change much on anyone's life. Facilitate us better. We shall definitely give you the groundbreaking stories that you need. Journalism without fear or favor.
Every year, 3rd May is set aside as a special day to remind governments and indeed the population of the world about the central contribution, the critical role that our media plays to make our lives and our world a better place. It is a reminder that the space, the freedom, and protection of journalists in the line of their duty is absolutely necessary. We know journalists continue to face lots of challenges ranging from low pay, intimidation, threats from security agencies, from governments, from big and multinational corporations. But journalists have continued to stand their ground and to provide information without fear or favor. We also know another challenge as the world is grappling with the pandemic, the coronavirus. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of fake news that has continued to provide harmful health advice and also many conspiracy theories. But the journalism will be the antidote to deal with this challenge of the new media and the information age that thrives on social media. So the space that journalists occupy remains cardinal and key, and it's my appeal that governments around the world provide the much needed space and freedom for our journalists to continue to serve in their profession. I call upon journalists to observe and embrace the self-regulatory mechanism that will allow them to create more confidence and integrity in the service of humanity. I congratulate and salute the media and would want to wish them a lovely World Press Freedom Day.
COVID-19 has been very challenging for the media on all fronts. For example, how does the media tell the story without, in its proper context, without compromising public interest? But in all this, the most challenged has been the business model, especially for the legacy media. As you know, we have seen huge salary cuts announced by the media giants, that is Vision Group and Nation Media Group in Kenya. And this is particularly, I think, challenging for the guys on the front line. And this brings us to the issue of safety of journalists, which we have been discussing for a long time. Now, safety of journalists does not mean that we protect the journalists from physical harassment, but also from psychological effects of doing their work in proper service to the public and citizens. How do you do this? Proper compensation and facilitation is one of the key components of ensuring journalists' safety. So the salary cuts, of course we know that the coronavirus has upset the way of doing business in very, very many areas. So we expect the media houses that when they are making these decisions, they will understand that safety of journalists is of paramount importance to the credibility and the future of the media houses. So we expect them not just to lay off journalists or to effect salary cuts just because to save force, but to make sure that they make decisions that will be paramount to safeguarding the future of the individual media houses and journalism.
So today, the 3rd of May 2020, we commemorate the World Press Freedom Day. Unfortunately, this comes at a time when in some countries you can't even mention the word press freedom. It is not there. It doesn't exist. But this doesn't have to be the trend. I believe as journalists, we can unite and fight for our rights. We can fight for this. I therefore call upon our bosses, the media owners, to please consider us. Work on our pay. We don't deserve peanuts. We need better facilitation. We need our safety to be considered, especially when we are going to the field, covering riots, covering pandemics like the current COVID-19 pandemic. Please, we need this. We need this for us and the journalists that will come after us. I am not the last journalist. You are not the last journalist. We are not the last journalists. The universities and institutions are filled with millions and millions of future journalists. To the security agencies, please stop battering journalists. We are just journalists. We are serving the nation like you're doing. We only have pens, a book, a camera, a recorder. You have sticks. You have guns. We are not competing. Let's work in harmony. I conclude by applauding my fellow journalists, the one who are covering the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Well done. But please, safety comes first.
We have somewhat of freedom of the press in Uganda. I think we are allowed to do our work with little interference from the government. Of course, like any other society, we've seen a few cases here and there of journalists being brutalized, of journalists running into trouble with the security agencies. But I think to a large extent, Uganda still has freedom of the press somewhat, because if I can do a story on security and I am not picked up, of course if I do a very sensitive story on security and stuff, then maybe I can run into trouble. But yeah, somewhat I think we have freedom of the media or of the press in this country to some extent. I think the key thing is the media owners should detach their businesses from the journalists, from the journalistic side of the company. Because if I am a journalist and I'm supposed to do a story on maybe a company that I know could maybe be infringing on the rights of the citizens, or I know they could have maybe done something which has put people's lives at risk, and we have to do the story. But then the owner of the company, who is a businessman most of the time, wants to shut it down because it could get in the wrong side with the business, the company that you want to report on. I think if they kind of detach themselves, and then also because of that, you see that sometimes, government is the biggest clients of these media houses. They spend a lot of money, and now if the government comes and says maybe don't do certain things, and then the media owners just bow or let their reporters be harassed, I think they need to pull up on that, because if they do that, then they could have contributed. Then as journalists, I think what we should do is maybe use more of these associations that are there. We need to empower them. We need to give them that morale, and then, because if we stand in solidarity with these organizations, then these media organizations like UJA and the rest, then in the long run we are going to have protection, and then we can have a united voice just in case there's an infringement of on a journalist or on the right to report. So yeah, I think that's what we need to do as journalists, as individual journalists, just besides the organizations where we work for, really.
Do I think there's press freedom in this country? I think there is. I'll give it 80%. Yeah, I give it 80%. Compared to other African countries and some countries in the Middle East, I think we're not doing badly. What can media owners do to support journalists? Number one is pay them well. Very sad that a journalist will go out, cover a story, and they're paid 5,000 shillings after risking their life, going through the sun and everything else. It's very sad. Number two is make sure they are safe while doing this. If someone is going to cover riots, make sure they can easily be identified as media, give them press jackets and every protective gear they need. During this COVID-19 season, make sure a journalist has a mask, has sanitizer and everything they need. That's very important. And how can journalists ensure that their rights and freedoms are respected? Number one, that whole respect is earned. It's very, very true. You can't really be respected if you don't respect yourself. So let's start with that. Let's respect ourselves as journalists. Let's be professional. It's very important. And number two is to ensure that we work together and be one team. What affects one journalist should really be of concern to another.